I stared at the cheap blue pen in my hand, my fingers shaking so hard I thought the plastic might snap. I looked at the document on the mahogany desk, then up at my brother's face. Michael wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That sharp, shark-like smirk he always wore when he thought he'd outsmarted someone. He stood there in a suit that cost more than my entire workshop, radiating a cold victory. This was the ultimate family betrayal. A knife in the back delivered while the dirt on our mother's grave was still fresh. He truly believed he had won, that I would be the one who regretted being the good daughter, while he walked away with everything. But he made a mistake. He forgot that family karma doesn't just arrive, it waits for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Welcome to Prime Karma Stories, your home for the most satisfying tales of revenge and justice. We dive deep into family drama and life lessons that prove karma always finds its way. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that rings in your ears until you feel like you're underwater. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway, each second feeling like a hammer blow. It had been exactly 48 hours since the funeral. 48 hours since I had watched them lower my mother, Sarah, into the ground. My heart felt like an open wound, and here was my brother, pouring salt into it. "Just sign it, Marie," Michael said, his voice dropping into that smooth tone he used to sell lies. "You know what Mom said at the very end. She was worried about me. She knew you had your little restoration business, your quiet life. She knew you were stable, but my firm is struggling, and Amber and I have a family to think about. Mom wanted me to have the $350,000 and the house to ensure our future." Beside him, Amber, his wife of 3 years, was tapping her long, blood-red nails against her designer purse. She didn't look like she was in mourning. She looked like she was waiting for a flight to a tropical island. She'd spent the funeral checking her reflection, and now she looked at me with a mixture of pity and boredom. "It's really for the best, Marie," Amber chimed in, her voice thin and grating. "You've always been so independent. You don't need a big house. It's too much for a single woman anyway. Michael is just doing what's practical." I looked at Charles, our family attorney. He'd known us since we were kids. He looked at me over his spectacles, his eyes clouded with sorrow. He looked like he wanted to pull the pen out of my hand, but his hands were tied by the law. "Marie," Charles said softly, "I want to be certain you understand. By signing this, you are voluntarily relinquishing your 50% stake in the cash and the property. You are agreeing that Michael's account of her verbal wish is final. Once this is signed, it's legally binding." "I understand," I whispered. My voice sounded like it belonged to a child. I thought back to the last 5 years. 5 years of sleeping on a cot in Mom's room. 5 years of administering morphine and cooking meals she could actually swallow. I was the one who canceled vacations and spent my savings when insurance wouldn't cover her specialists. Michael? He visited twice a year. He'd bring chocolates she couldn't eat, take a photo for his Instagram to show what a devoted son he was, and then leave because he had a conference call. He wasn't there when she took her last breath. I was. I was the one holding her hand. She hadn't mentioned money. She had only looked at me and whispered my name. But grief messes with your head. Michael was so certain. He claimed they had a secret conversation while I was at the pharmacy. He said she was crying, worried he'd lose his business. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe in her drug-fogged days, she decided her golden boy needed the help more than I did. I was the worker. I could always fix things. Michael was the one who broke them. "I just want the fighting to stop," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "If Mom truly thought he needed it more, then I won't stand in the way." "That's my girl," Michael said. The greed in his eyes made me sick. I pressed the pen to the paper. I watched the ink flow, forming the letters of my name, Marie A. Bennett. Each stroke felt like I was erasing my own future, but I just wanted to go home. I wanted the smell of those funeral lilies to stop following me. The moment I finished, Michael snatched the paper off the desk. He didn't even wait for the ink to dry. "There, it's done," Michael said. "Now, Charles, About the release of funds. We've already put a deposit down on a new place in the city, and we need to move fast. Charles didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me. He reached under his desk and pulled out a battered wooden box. It was made of oak, the brass latch covered in green tarnish. "Marie," Charles said, "your mother left this specifically for you. She brought it to my office 6 months ago. She was clear that this was not to be touched by anyone else. She called it her legacy box." Michael snorted. "Oh, right. The box of junk. Mom told me about that. She said, 'Give the house to Michael, and give the old photos and the dust to Marie. She knew you loved that sentimental crap.'" He turned to Amber and they shared a mocking laugh. "We're going to the house now," Michael said, straightening his tie. "We're changing the locks at 5 p.m. If you have anything left in your room or the garage, get it now. We've hired an estate liquidator for tomorrow." "Those old watercolors Mom did? They're going in the bin. They don't fit the modern aesthetic we want for the flip." My heart stopped. "Michael, you can't. Those paintings were her life. They're amateur, Marie, just like your little shop," he said, walking toward the door. "Don't be late. I'd hate for you to have to break a window to get your paintbrushes." I sat there, clutching the box, as the door clicked shut. I felt small and utterly betrayed. I had signed away my life, and my brother was already planning to throw our mother's soul into a dumpster. I walked to my car, the sun blinding me. I sat in the driver's seat, the box sitting next to me, and I just cried. I cried for the mother I lost, and the brother I never truly had. I looked at the box Michael called junk. As I reached out to touch the tarnished latch, I noticed something. My fingers, trained to find seams in old wood, felt a slight ridge. There was a hidden compartment in the side, disguised with clever joinery. My heart skipped a beat. I pressed the wood, and a small drawer popped open. Inside wasn't a photo. It was a single silver key with a tag that said, "The truth is never buried as deep as they think." If you've ever felt like the quiet one, who does all the work while the loudest relative takes the credit, you know exactly how I felt. Why do you think people like Michael think they can get away with everything just because they shout the loudest? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And if you thought this was the end of my story, you have no idea what my mother was hiding. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine idling, the air conditioning struggling against the midday heat. My hand was clamped shut over that silver key, the metal biting into my palm. It was a sharp, grounding pain, a reminder that I was still awake, that this nightmare of a morning was actually happening. I looked at the lawyer's office in the rearview mirror, half expecting Michael to come running out, realizing he'd forgotten to steal my dignity along with the house, but he didn't. He was probably already inside, popping champagne or looking at brochures for marble countertops. I threw the car into gear and started the drive toward my apartment, but my mind was already miles away, drifting back through the last 5 years. People like to talk about caregiving as if it's some noble, saintly calling. They see the soft focus version, holding hands by a fireplace, reading books aloud, but they don't see the grit. They don't see the 3 a.m. wake-up calls when the oxygen machine starts beeping, or the way your back feels like it's breaking after you've lifted a grown woman into a bath for the 3rd time that day. They don't see the bank account slowly draining because you're choosing between a new set of tires for your car or a specialist who doesn't take mom's insurance. I spent over $30,000 of my own savings during those 5 years. Every penny I'd tucked away from the restored soul went into making sure my mother could stay in her own home, surrounded by her own things. And where was the golden boy during all of this? Michael was always closing a deal. That was his favorite phrase. "I can't make it this weekend, Marie. I'm closing a major deal." He'd send a text message with a prayer hands emoji and think he'd done his duty. Once, when Mom was hospitalized with pneumonia and we weren't sure she'd make it through the night, I called him 16 times. 16. He finally picked up at 11 p.m., the sound of a loud bar and clinking glasses in the background. "Marie, relax," he'd said, his voice thick with a cocktail or two. "Mom's a fighter. She's fine. I've got investors here from Dubai. I can't just walk out. Call me if something actually happens. That was Michael. He showed up for the events. The birthday dinners where he'd pay the bill with a credit card that I later found out was maxed out. Or the holidays where he'd spend 45 minutes taking the perfect photo with Mom just to post it online with a caption about family over everything. He was a merchant of appearances, a man who built his entire life on a foundation of expensive suits and borrowed prestige. I, on the other hand, am a restorer. My world is made of things that people have given up on. My shop is filled with the scent of turpentine, beeswax, and aged oak. I spend my days hunched over a workbench, carefully stripping away layers of cheap, ugly paint that someone applied decades ago to hide the beautiful wood underneath. I have the patience of a mountain. I can spend a week on a single square inch of a mahogany table, working the grain, bringing back the glow that was lost to time. I think that's why I stayed so quiet during the funeral and the reading of the will. I'm used to waiting for the truth to reveal itself. I'm used to the process of uncovering what's real. But Michael didn't see my patience as a strength. He saw it as a weakness. He saw my quietness as a green light to run me over. He and Amber were two of a kind. Amber was a woman who didn't understand the concept of a legacy. To her, an antique wasn't a piece of history. It was just used furniture. I remember her coming over to Mom's house about a year ago. She'd walked through the living room, wrinkling her nose at Mom's collection of hand-painted watercolors. "Don't you think it's a bit cluttered, Marie?" she'd asked, pointing at a portrait Mom had done of our father before he died. "If you guys ever decided to sell, you'd really need to neutralize the space. Gray paint, white trim, get rid of all this personality." Mom had been sitting right there, her hands knotted with arthritis, and I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes. But Michael didn't defend her. He just laughed and said, "She's right, Mom. Amber has a great eye for what's trending." Trending. My mother's life wasn't a trend. Her art wasn't a trend. But to them, everything was a commodity. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I looked at the box on the seat next to me. Michael had called it junk. He'd laughed at the idea that Mom would leave me a box of sentimental crap while he got the cold, hard cash. But Michael never understood our mother. He never realized that Sarah Bennett was a woman of secrets. She was a woman who knew how to read a room, and she had spent 40 years reading her son. I reached out and touched the side of the box, feeling the hidden ridge where the silver key had been tucked away. My mother knew I was a restorer. She knew I had the eyes to find what was hidden. She knew I was the only one who would actually look at what she left behind, instead of just looking for a price tag. My heart was still racing, a mix of anger and a strange, budding hope. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Michael had just pushed me. But what he didn't realize was that I knew how to fly, and he was the one without a parachute. I had been the good sister for too long. I had been the one who took the hits, who made the sacrifices, who kept the peace, but the peace was dead. Michael had buried it alongside our mother. I looked at my phone. It was 1:30 p.m. I had 3.5 hours before Michael changed the locks on the only home I had ever truly known. I needed to get there. I needed to save what I could before the liquidators arrived to turn my mother's memories into a line item on a spreadsheet. But more than that, I needed to know what that silver key opened. The truth was coming, and for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't afraid of the cracks it might reveal. I was ready to strip away the varnish and see what Michael was so desperate to hide. I know how hard it is when you're the one doing all the heavy lifting in a family, only to be cast aside when it's time to settle the score. It feels like your heart is being wrung out like a wet rag. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you had to find the strength to stand up to people who should have had your back, I want you to know you're not alone. I've found so much strength in hearing how other women turned their pain into power. In fact, I've put together a collection of stories just like mine, stories of justice, resilience, and the ultimate karma. You can click on the playlist on your screen right now to see how other quiet sisters finally found their voices and took back what was theirs. I put the silver key in my pocket and grabbed my heavy-duty toolbox from the trunk. I wasn't just going to my mother's house to pack a few boxes. I was going there to reclaim a piece of myself. As I drove back toward my childhood home, I saw Michael's car parked in the driveway, and a wave of cold resolve washed over me. He thought the house was his. He thought he'd locked me out of my own life. But as I pulled up to the curb, I saw something in the trash pile by the curb that made my blood run cold, and my heart turned to stone. I pulled up to the curb, and my breath caught in my throat. There, sitting next to the overflowing trash cans, was a stack of damp cardboard portfolios. My heart didn't just break, it shattered. I recognized them instantly. Those were my mother's rainy day series, the watercolors she had painted over 30 years, capturing the way the light hit the garden after a storm. They were wet. The morning dew and the humidity of the afternoon had already started to warp the thick paper. To Michael, this was just clutter. To him, it was amateur junk that got in the way of his modern aesthetic. But to me, these were her soul. I scrambled out of the car before I'd even turned off the engine, falling to my knees on the grass to pull the portfolios away from the trash. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip the handles. "Marie, what on earth are you doing?" I looked up. Amber was standing on the porch, a Starbucks cup in one hand and her phone in the other. She was wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and a silk tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked down at me with a mixture of disgust and amusement, like I was a stray dog rummaging through the garbage. "These are Mom's paintings, Amber," I gasped, trying to wipe the dirt off the top portfolio. "You threw them out, like they were nothing." "Michael said they weren't worth anything," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "We had an appraiser look at them online. He said there's no market for hobbyist art. We need the space for the staging furniture. The truck is coming at 8 a.m. tomorrow, and we have a lot of junk to clear out before then." "Junk?" I stood up, clutching the wet portfolios to my chest. This was her life. She spent 30 years on these. And she spent 30 years living in a house she couldn't afford. Michael's voice boomed from inside the house. He walked out onto the porch, looking at his watch. "It's 3:45, Marie. You're early. But since you're here, you might as well take the rest of your treasures from the garage. The liquidators already tagged the power tools, so don't touch those. They're part of the estate assets now." I felt a surge of cold fury that made my vision blur. "The power tools? Michael, I bought half of those. I have the receipts in my shop." "If they're in the house, they're part of the estate," he said, his voice hard and flat. "And since you signed that waiver, the estate belongs to me. That's how the law works, little sister. Maybe you should have spent less time restoring old chairs and more time learning how to read a contract." He stepped down off the porch, walking toward me with a swagger that made my skin crawl. He looked at the portfolios in my arms and snorted. "You're really going to keep those? They're water damaged, Marie. They're trash, just like that old box Mom left you. You're so obsessed with the past that you're letting the future pass you by." "My future isn't built on stealing from my family, Michael." I spat. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Stealing? I'm just taking what's mine. Mom knew I was the one who could actually do something with this house. You would have stayed here and let it rot, just like you're letting your own life rot in that dusty little studio. Amber and I are going to turn this place into something world-class. We're moving to the city, Marie. We're going to be the people Mom always knew we could be." I watched him walk to the garage and punch a new code into the keypad. The heavy door groaned open, revealing my workbench, the one my father had built for me when I was 16. It was already covered in yellow lot stickers. Everything I had built, everything I had used to support our mother for the last 5 years, was being prepared for an auction block. "You have 1 hour, Michael said, not looking at me. "At 5 p.m., the security system goes live. If you're still on the property, the police will be called for trespassing. I've already notified the neighbors that you're no longer welcome here." I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood, watching my brother and his wife treat my mother's home like a carcass they were picking clean. They were vultures. They didn't care about the memories, the love, or the sacrifices. They only cared about the top dollar they could squeeze out of the walls. I spent that hour moving as fast as I could. I didn't take much. I couldn't fit it all in my car. I grabbed my father's old hand planes, a few boxes of Mom's clothes that hadn't been liquidated yet, and every single scrap of paper I could find in her desk. Michael and Amber watched me from the porch like I was a thief, whispering to each other and checking their phones. As the clock struck 5, I threw the last box into my trunk. Michael walked down the driveway, his hand on the remote for the gate. "Don't worry about the rest, Marie," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I'll make sure the rubbish gets a good home, or a good incinerator." I didn't say a word. I got into my car and drove away, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. I felt like I had let them win. I had signed the paper. I had walked away. I had let him call my mother's soul junk. But as I reached over to steady the portfolios on the passenger seat, my hand brushed against the wooden box. I felt the weight of that silver key in my pocket. Michael thought he'd locked me out of the house, but he didn't realize that the house was just boards and nails. The real treasure wasn't in the garage or the living room. It was sitting right next to me, waiting for me to find the courage to see what was underneath the surface. I realized then that Michael hadn't just thrown away the paintings. He'd thrown away the only person who truly knew where the bodies were buried. And as I turned the corner toward my studio, I looked at the hidden compartment in the box one more time. I wasn't just a restorer anymore. I was an investigator. And Michael was about to find out that when you throw things away, you better be sure they don't have a way of coming back to haunt you. I want to know, have you ever had someone treat your most precious memories like they were garbage? How did you keep from losing your mind right then and there? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only one who has felt that fire in their chest. I thought I was going to my shop to cry, but when I finally put that silver key into the lock it was meant for, I didn't cry. I screamed, because what I found inside wasn't just a secret, it was a death sentence for Michael's greed. I pulled into the gravel driveway of my studio, the restored soul, and for the first time that day, I felt like I could actually breathe. My shop is a small converted barn on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown lilacs and the smell of damp earth. Inside, it smells of turpentine, beeswax, and aged oak, the scents that have been my only comfort for 20 years. It's a place where things don't stay broken. It's a place where I have control. I carried the wooden box inside, setting it gently on my main workbench. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, casting a sterile glow over the scarred wood of the table. Michael's laughter still echoed in my ears. The box of junk, he'd called it. Outdated and dusty. I sat on my stool and just looked at it. My mother, Sarah, had been a woman of quiet, deliberate actions. She didn't do anything by accident. If she had brought this box to Charles 6 months before she died, she was sending me a message. She knew Michael would come for the cash. She knew Amber would come for the house. And she knew I was the only one who would come for her. I reached for the tarnished brass latch. It was stuck, years of humidity and neglect having fused the metal. In any other situation, I would have used a solvent and a fine bristled brush, working slowly to preserve the patina. But today, my hands were shaking with a mix of grief and adrenaline. I took a small flathead screwdriver and gently pried it. With a sharp crack, the box surrendered. The smell of cedar and dried lavender wafted out. So strong it felt like Mom had just stepped into the room. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the scent wash over me. When I opened them, I saw exactly what Michael had mocked. On top was a stack of faded Polaroids held together by a fraying rubber band. I picked them up, my thumb brushing over the white borders. There was a photo of me at 7 years old, covered in blue paint, grinning like I'd discovered a new continent. There was my father, sitting in his favorite armchair with a pipe in his hand, looking at Mom with a gaze so full of love it hurt to look at. I dug deeper. I found my father's old pocket watch, the one with the cracked glass face that had stopped ticking the day he passed away. Michael had wanted the $2, 5 million penthouse in his dreams, but he'd stepped right over this watch 1,000 times in the attic. To him, it was a broken tool. To me, it was the sound of my father's heartbeat. There was a pressed rose from my high school graduation, now nothing more than brittle brown dust. There were my first grade report cards and a collection of smooth river stones we'd gathered on a trip to the coast when I was 12. "Why, Mom?" I whispered to the empty shop. "Why just this? Did you really think I didn't need the help? Did you really think Michael deserved everything else?" I felt a fresh wave of defeat. I was a 42-year-old woman sitting in a drafty barn, clutching a handful of old photos while my brother was probably picking out Italian marble for his new kitchen. I felt like the world's biggest fool. I had played by the rules, I had been the good daughter, and I had been left with the scraps. But then, my eyes landed on the silver key I'd found in the hidden compartment earlier. I pulled it out of my pocket. It was small, delicate, with intricate scrollwork on the bow. I looked back at the box. I'm a restorer. I know how things are built. I began to run my fingers along the interior velvet lining of the box. It felt thick, too thick for the exterior dimensions. I emptied the photos and the stones onto the workbench. I took a small high-intensity flashlight and peered into the corners. There, at the very bottom, hidden under a layer of silk lining that had been masterfully glued down, was a tiny keyhole. It was so small you'd never see it, unless you were looking for it with a professional eye. My heart began to thud against my ribs. I inserted the silver key. It slid in perfectly, like it had been waiting for me. I turned it, and instead of a click, there was a soft, mechanical whir. The entire bottom of the box, a false floor made of thin, reinforced steel, popped up by half an inch. I lifted the panel. Underneath wasn't a pile of cash. It wasn't jewelry. It was a small, leather-bound diary and a USB drive, and tucked into the cover of the diary was a photo I had never seen before. It was a picture of my mother and Charles, the lawyer, sitting at a diner table. They were both looking at the camera with grim, determined expressions. In front of them on the table was a document titled Final Codicil and Integrity Clause, Property of Sarah Bennett. The date on the back of the photo was only 3 weeks ago. My hands started to sweat. I realized then that my mother hadn't just left me memories. She had left me a roadmap. She knew Michael would try to trick me. She knew he would lie about her final wishes. And she had set a trap so elaborate, so perfectly tailored to his greed, that he had walked right into it the moment he handed me that blue pen. I reached for the USB drive, my mind racing. Michael thought he'd changed the locks on the house, but he had no idea that I now held the key to his entire world. There's a special kind of peace that comes when you realize the person you loved was actually watching over you the whole time, even when you felt most alone. Have you ever had a gut feeling that someone was lying to you, but you didn't have the proof until it was almost too late? I'm sitting here reading your comments, and I want to know, how many of you have discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? I plugged the drive into my laptop, my breath hitching as the files began to load. The first folder was labeled Audio Logs, Master Bedroom. I clicked play, and the voice that filled my shop made my blood turn to ice. It was Michael, but he wasn't talking to Mom. He was talking to Amber, and he was explaining exactly how they were going to get rid of the old woman once and for all. The hum of my laptop felt unnaturally loud in the stillness of the barn. I sat there, frozen, as the first audio file began to play. I expected to hear my mother's voice, maybe a final message, a goodbye I hadn't been ready for. But what came through the speakers wasn't my mother's gentle rasp. It was Michael. His voice was different. In public, he always used this polished, deep baritone that made him sound like a man in control. But in this recording, he sounded thin, jagged, and desperate. "She's still breathing, Amber. I don't know what else to tell you," Michael's voice hissed. There was the sound of a door clicking shut, likely the master bedroom door. "Well, she needs to stop," Amber's voice snapped back, cold as a winter frost. The developers in the city aren't going to wait forever, Mike. If we don't get that deposit in by the end of the month, the whole deal collapses. We'll be bankrupt by Christmas. You told me this house was a sure thing. It is a sure thing. But Marie is always here. She's like a shadow. I can't even get into the filing cabinet without her asking if I need a glass of water. She's obsessed with caring for her. Then tell her to leave. Tell her she needs a break. Or better yet, tell her mom told you she wanted her to move out. Marie is a pushover, Mike. She's soft, just like your mother. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the workbench to keep from falling off my stool. My skin crawled. I realized the date of the recording. It was from 3 weeks before Mom passed. They weren't just waiting for her to die. They were actively resentful of every breath she took. As a restorer, I've spent my life learning that you can't trust the surface of anything. You see a beautiful mahogany desk and you think it's solid. But then you apply a little turpentine, you strip away the layers of wax and grime, and you find the rot. You find where the termites have been eating away at the core while the owner just kept polishing the top. Michael was that desk. He was all polish and no soul. I clicked on the next file. This one was recorded in the kitchen. I could hear the familiar clinking of Mom's favorite ceramic mugs. I've already got the document drafted, Michael was saying. It's a waiver. If I can get Marie to sign it right after the funeral, while she's still half conscious from grief, she won't even read the fine print. I'll tell her it was Mom's dying wish. She'll do anything if she thinks it's what Mom wanted. What if the lawyer asks questions? Amber asked. Charles is old. He's sentimental. As long as Marie doesn't fight it, he'll just process the paperwork. He thinks I'm the successful one who can handle the estate. He sees Marie as just a hobbyist. I closed the laptop with a sharp thud. I couldn't listen to any more. My own brother had sat in our mother's kitchen drinking her tea, while he planned how to use my love for her as a weapon to ruin me. He had looked at my grief not as something to comfort, but as a tactical advantage. But then, I remembered the gold envelope in the box. I reached for it, my fingers steady now. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of heavy parchment. It wasn't a letter. It was a legal document titled The Integrity Clause, codicil to the last will and testament of Sarah Bennett. I read the words, and for the first time in days, I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. My mother hadn't been soft. She hadn't been fogged by her illness. She had been a lioness. The clause was simple but devastating. It stated that if any heir attempted to use fraud, coercion, or false claims of verbal wishes to manipulate another heir into surrendering their portion of the estate, that person would be automatically and irrevocably disinherited. Their share would skip them entirely and go to the victim of the fraud. And the best part? The clause required incontrovertible proof. I looked at the USB drive. I looked at the hidden camera Mom must have had Charles install in the bedroom smoke detector. My mother had known exactly what Michael was doing. She had let him think he was outsmarting her. She had let him play the part of the golden boy, while she recorded his every move, his every lie, his every cruel word about me. Michael thought he'd locked me out of the house. He thought he'd taken the $350,000 and the property. But he hadn't realized that by making me sign that waiver based on a lie, he had pulled the trigger on his own destruction. I picked up the phone. It was time to call Charles. But I wasn't calling to complain. I was calling to set the stage for the final restoration. Have you ever had that moment where the golden child of the family finally gets caught in their own web? It's not about the money, is it? It's about the truth finally coming to light. I want to know, have you ever had a relative try to gaslight you into believing something that you knew in your heart was a lie? How did you feel when you finally got the proof? Drop a comment below. I'm reading every single one of them. I didn't call Michael. I wanted him to keep celebrating. I wanted him to spend every penny of the credit he was probably taking out right now. Because the bigger the house he built on his lies, the harder it was going to hurt when the whole thing came crashing down. The next 3 days were a masterclass in what I call the arrogance of greed. I stayed in my workshop, the scent of lavender from the legacy box still clinging to my hair, while I watched Michael's world inflate like a balloon made of thin, brittle glass. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. Michael couldn't help himself. He was the kind of man who didn't feel successful unless someone else was watching him succeed, and he especially needed me to see it. On Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a FaceTime call from Michael. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. I needed to play my part. I needed to be the defeated sister, just a little while longer. The screen filled with his face, flushed from wine and what looked like expensive steak. He was sitting in a dimly lit, high-end restaurant. In the background, I could see Amber laughing with another couple, her neck draped in a new diamond pendant that I knew hadn't come from Mom's collection. "Marie, just checking in on you, sis," Michael said, his voice booming with a hollow joviality. He panned the camera around the table. "We're celebrating. Just signed the contract for the kitchen remodel on the house. Carrara marble, top-of-the-line appliances. Amber found this designer who usually only works for CEOs. It's going to be incredible." "A kitchen remodel?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and weary. "Michael, the probate hasn't even cleared. You don't have the funds yet." He let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Oh, Marie, this is why you'll always be small time. I've got credit. Banks love a man with a $2.5 million property and a guaranteed cash inheritance. I took out a bridge loan this morning. Why wait to live the life we deserve?" "Mom only died a week ago, Michael," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "And she'd want us to be happy," he snapped, his smile momentarily slipping to reveal the jagged edges underneath. "Look, I called because I wanted to be a big brother and offer you a deal. I know your little shop is probably struggling. If you need a few thousand to get by, I can let you have a small advance. Think of it as a gift. Just so you don't have to keep living like a pauper." The audacity of it made my skin prickle. He was offering me crumbs from the bread he'd stolen from my own table. "I'll be fine, Michael," I said. "I'm just focusing on the box Mom left me." "The box." He turned the camera back to Amber, who leaned into the frame, her eyes glassy. "Did you find any gold coins in there, Marie? Or just more pictures of your glory days at the lake?" "Just memories," I said quietly. "Well, memories don't pay for Carrara marble," Michael said, smirking. "Anyway, stay out of the way. I've got a meeting with the real estate agent tomorrow. We're listing the house at a premium. Don't call me unless it's an emergency. I'm going to be very busy being the man of the family." He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the dark screen for a long time. The next morning, I walked into Charles's office. I wasn't the grieving, broken woman who had signed the waiver 3 days ago. I was wearing my best suit, my hair pulled back tight, carrying my laptop and the legacy box. Charles looked up as I entered, his expression weary. "Marie, if this is about the garage tools, I've already sent a letter to Michael." "It's not about the tools, Charles," I said, sitting down and opening my laptop. "It's about the truth." I played the recordings. I showed him the video from the hidden camera Mom had installed, the one that showed Michael and Amber in her bedroom, laughing about how they were going to get rid of the old woman and trick poor, stupid Marie into signing her life away. I watched Charles's face. He went from confusion to shock, and then to a cold, professional fury. He had known my mother for 40 years. He had respected her, and watching her son treat her like a hurdle to be cleared was more than he could stand. "He lied to me," Charles whispered, his voice shaking. "He stood in this office and looked me in the eye and lied about her final wishes." "He didn't just lie to you, Charles," I said, sliding the parchment from the gold envelope across the desk. "He triggered the integrity clause. He committed fraud against the estate, and he used coaction to get that signature. He thinks he's building a kingdom, but he's actually just digging a grave for his own future." Charles read the clause, his eyes moving rapidly across the page. He looked at the USB drive, then back at me. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Marie," he said, his voice regaining its strength. "Michael thinks he's playing checkers. He has no idea your mother was playing Grandmaster chess. This isn't just a dispute. This is an automatic disqualification." "What's the next step?" I asked. "He has a meeting here tomorrow afternoon," Charles said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound fire. "He thinks he's coming in to sign the final release for the bridge loan documents. He even invited Amber to witness the triumph." "I want to be here," I said. "Oh, Marie," Charles replied, leaning back in his chair. "You wouldn't miss this for the world." I left his office feeling a strange sense of peace. Michael was out there right now, picking out furniture, spending money that would never be his, and bragging to everyone who would listen about his inheritance. He was so blinded by the shine of the gold that he didn't realize the ground was already crumbling beneath his feet. There is a specific kind of satisfaction in knowing that the loudest person in the room is about to be silenced by the truth. Have you ever had to sit through a dinner or a holiday with a relative who was bragging about something they didn't earn? How did you keep your mouth shut knowing what you knew? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how you all handle these vultures in your own lives. I went back to my shop and spent the evening cleaning my tools. I wasn't just a restorer anymore. I was the architect of Michael's reality check. And tomorrow I was going to watch him realize that some things, like a mother's love and a daughter's loyalty, can never be liquidated. The air in Charles's office felt different today. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of grief we'd shared just a week ago. Today, the air was crisp, charged with a tension that hummed like a live wire. I sat in the same leather chair where I'd signed away my life, my hands resting calmly on the oak legacy box. I wasn't shaking anymore. My father always told me that the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait. The door burst open, and Michael strode in like he was walking onto a movie set. He was wearing a new tailored navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage. Amber followed him, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She was draped in a trench coat that looked like it belonged on a runway, and her smile was so sharp it could have drawn blood. "Marie, you're here again?" Michael said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I thought we agreed you'd stay at the shop while I handled the business side of things. There's no need for you to be here for the boring paperwork." "I think there is, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "Whatever," he said, waving a hand dismissively as he sat down across from Charles. He slammed his briefcase onto the desk. "Let's get to it, Charles. My contractors need the first installment for the penthouse renovation by 4 p.m., and I've got a real estate agent waiting to list the family home. Just hand over the final release for the bridge loan and the probate confirmation." Charles didn't move. He sat there, his hands interlaced on his desk, looking at Michael with a gaze so cold it should have frozen the coffee in Michael's hand. "Michael," Charles began, his voice low and dangerous. "Before we discuss any release of funds, we need to address a discovery made by your sister in the legacy box your mother left her." Michael snorted, leaning back and looking at Amber. "The box of junk? What did she find, Charles? A recipe for lemon cake? A photo of her crying at the prom? Marie, if you're trying to stall because you're jealous..." "It wasn't a recipe, Michael," Charles interrupted. He reached into a folder and pulled out the gold envelope. "It was a codicil, a final amendment to your mother's will, signed, witnessed, and notarized 3 weeks before she passed." Michael's smile didn't disappear, but it froze. He looked at the gold envelope like it was a snake coiled on the desk. "A codicil? Mom was out of it 3 weeks ago. She didn't know what she was doing. Marie probably tricked her into signing something." "Actually," Charles said, leaning forward, "this codicil contains something called an integrity clause. Your mother was a very wise woman, Michael. She understood that family betrayal often wears the mask of a smile. The clause states that if any heir uses fraud, coercion, or false claims of verbal wishes to manipulate another heir into surrendering their portion, that heir is to be immediately and irrevocably disinherited." The room went deathly silent. Michael's face didn't just change, it transformed. He turned pale, a sickly grayish white that made the expensive tan on his face look like cheap paint. His hands, which had been so confidently drumming on the desk, suddenly went still. That's ridiculous," Michael stammered, his voice losing its polished baritone. "There was no fraud. Marie signed that waiver because she wanted to, because she knew I needed it more. Mom told me." "Mom didn't tell you anything, Michael," I said, opening my laptop, "and we both know it." I pressed play on the first audio file. The office was filled with the sound of Michael's own voice, hissing to Amber about how they were going to get rid of the old woman, and how I was a soft pushover who would sign anything if I thought it was Mom's wish. Amber gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Michael stared at the laptop like it was a ghost. He looked pale and shaken, as if the ground had literally opened up beneath his designer shoes. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a caught thief. "This is illegal!" Michael screamed, standing up so fast his chair flipped over. "You recorded me? That's a violation of privacy. You can't use that." "In this state, Michael," Charles said, his voice like iron, "video surveillance for the purpose of protecting a vulnerable adult is perfectly legal. And the integrity clause specifically mentions that such evidence is admissible to protect the estate's intent. You lied to your sister. You coerced her into signing away her rights based on a fraudulent claim of a verbal wish that never existed." Charles picked up a pen and crossed out a line on a document in front of him. "As of this moment, Michael, you are officially disinherited from the estate of Sarah Bennett. You have no claim to the $350,000. You have no claim to the family home. And because you've already taken out a bridge loan against assets you no longer own, you are now personally liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt." Michael staggered back, hitting the wall. He looked like he was going to vomit. Amber, seeing the ship sinking, grabbed her purse. "You told me this was a sure thing, Michael," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You told me we were rich. I'm not staying here to be bankrupt with you." She didn't even look back as she stormed out of the office, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. Michael was left standing there alone. No house, no money, no wife, just the family karma he had spent years building, finally falling on his head. I didn't feel the surge of joy I thought I would. I just felt a quiet, somber peace. The truth was restored. The layers of lies had been stripped away. I didn't want him to regret it. I wanted him to understand it. I wanted him to see that you can't build a life on the ruins of someone else's love. "Marie, please," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your brother. You can't do this to me. I'll lose everything." I looked at him, and all I saw was the man who had called my mother's paintings rubbish and thrown them in the trash. "You already lost everything, Michael," I said softly. "The moment you decided that money was worth more than our mother's soul. Have you ever seen someone's world crumble in a single moment when their lies finally caught up to them? It's a chilling sight, isn't it? But is it ever enough to truly pay for the pain they caused? Let me know in the comments if you think Michael got what he deserved, or if I should have been even harder on him." I walked out of the office, leaving Michael alone with the lawyer and the consequences of his greed. But as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, and it made my heart stop. It was a photo of my mother's house, and there was smoke billowing out of the attic windows. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, the photo on my phone screen blurring through my tears. I didn't even think. I just drove. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I raced back to the only home I'd ever known. By the time I turned onto our street, the smell of acrid smoke was heavy in the air, and the flashing red lights of 3 fire trucks bathed the neighborhood in a restless, bloody glow. I jumped out of the car before it had even fully stopped. "My house! Is anyone inside?" I screamed at a firefighter. "We've got it under control, ma'am. It was mostly contained to the attic and the master bedroom," he said, holding me back. I looked toward the curb and saw him. Michael. He was sitting on the grass, his expensive navy suit ruined, covered in soot and ash. He wasn't crying. He was just staring at the ground, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He looked pale, his face a mask of shock and defeat. Beside him stood a police officer, taking notes. Michael had gone back to the house in a blind, vengeful rage after leaving Charles's office. He'd intended to burn the junk he thought I valued more than him. The old journals, the leftover sketches, the rubbish from the attic. But he'd been reckless. A stray spark from his lighter had caught on the old cedar insulation, and the house he thought he'd stolen almost became his funeral pyre. He didn't just lose his inheritance that day. He nearly lost his life trying to spite mine. This was the final, smoking embers of his family betrayal. The fire was out within the hour. The attic was charred, and there was water damage in the hallway, but the structure was solid. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, I walked through the damp, darkened rooms. I found Michael's briefcase, the one he'd slammed so confidently on Charles's desk, floating in a puddle of grimy water in the foyer. Michael was taken away that morning, facing charges of reckless endangerment and arson, because he'd already spent the bridge loan money on Carrara marble and designer clothes he couldn't return. He was drowning in debt. Amber didn't even show up for his hearing. She'd wiped her hands of him the second the bank accounts froze. Last I heard, Michael was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment 3 towns away, working a job he hated, with a reputation that would make him radioactive to any investor for the rest of his life. He finally regretted the moment he thought greed was thicker than blood. It took me 6 months to restore the house. I did most of the work myself. I stripped the soot from the walls and polished the floors until they glowed. I rehung my mother's rainy day watercolors, the ones I'd saved from the trash, and placed the legacy box on the mantle. I sat in the living room last night, the house quiet and filled with the scent of fresh wax and home. I realized my mother hadn't just left me a box of photos. She'd left me the chance to prove who I was. She knew that family karma would eventually sort the wheat from the chaff. She knew that while Michael was chasing the wind, I would be the one to keep the fire burning. The right kind of fire. The truth has a way of coming home. It doesn't matter how many layers of lies you paint over it. Eventually, the wood underneath reveals its true grain. I'm not the soft sister anymore. I'm the daughter who stayed, the woman who restored her life, and the one who finally knows what it means to be truly wealthy. If you believe in justice and love a good karma story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have forgiven Michael? Or was the loss of everything the only way he would ever learn? Let me know below. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. This is Marie, signing off from a home that finally feels like mine again. Remember, never let anyone dim your light, especially not those who share your name.